Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are going to discuss the national news of the day. Of course, the biggest story of the past week or so since we last had our show, and we didn't actually talk about Afghanistan on our last show, which is amazing. It was a potential topic, but obviously things have happened since. I think that the Biden administration is, of course, as we all know, the Afghan government just melted away overnight. The president left. The military just completely folded. They're not fighting. They're not even really surrendering. According to reporters, they're just kind of mingling with Taliban fighters in the streets of Kabul. I mean, it's pretty amazing to watch. Meanwhile, there's a panic. Comparisons have been made with Saigon, probably really faulty comparisons, and we can discuss that. But some people were killed in a really horrific way, trying to get out of the country on the planes, panicking, falling from the sky, having grabbed onto the plane. But it does look like people are getting out in an orderly way. The American military, has taken over the airport, pretty much unchallenged by the Taliban, able to get all the Americans out and a lot of a lot of Afghan nationals. I don't know. There's a lot of criticism of Biden. We'll talk a little bit about the media approach to it later in the show. But and of course, the RNC completely deleted its posting from its website about bragging about Trump's negotiation of the peace deal with Taliban. A lot of discussion about what comes next, what's going to happen. There's a lot of mystery around what kind of government the Taliban is going to make. Are they going to make an attempt at moderation, or are they going to shut down education for women and assert more extreme religious policies, or are the Taliban even unified enough for a coherent policy? There have been reports of warlords in one town doing one thing and others doing another thing. Will there be a civil war between the Taliban? But focusing also on, what does this mean for America? Have we learned a lesson? Is the lesson any different from what we should have learned from Vietnam? We could talk about those things in the 12 minutes that we have. Dave, why don't you get started?
Yeah, so first cut is that you and I talked about we would hit a little bit of the policy for context because that's important for people, and then we'd get more into the politics, the U.S. domestic politics side. So I'm going to focus on that first piece, and even within there, you mentioned a bunch. So like you said, we could talk for hours. But so one big question that keeps getting asked of me and my peer group is, does the Taliban have support there? Like, why did it go down this way? And the other, what I thought was how I've come to process this, and it's still very fresh and new. We're all still learning, but there was a lot that was revealed in the Afghanistan papers, which was an insightful study, resulted in a book or two being written about it. Didn't get a whole lot of press. Lots of reasons. We're going to probably cover that when we do the press piece. So here's my 5 bullet point summary of just for context for folks. When you're trying to figure out if the Taliban has support there or not. Observing that the military was not willing to fight and die for a regime that it viewed as corrupt, and that regional leaders' fear of atrocity compelled them into submission is not enough evidence to jump even a little bit to believe that there's even a little bit of public support, let alone massive public support. Secondly, an entire generation grew up with hope for the future, but are now facing a barbaric and brutal conception of social order, not something that they could get behind. Yes, probably some people grew up, some people support the conservative notions of patriarchal hierarchy inherent in that ruler's vision, but certainly not minority groups, not women, not young people, not educated people, not secular people, etc. And one other big thing that I don't really see people talking about because it's complicated. there are 4 million Shia who are at risk in the country. I watched the Frontline documentary where they interviewed the Taliban leader 3 weeks ago. It aired, so that means they must have interviewed him a month or two ago at least. And he said Afghanistan is engaged in a civil war against the Hazara people who are backed by Iran and who have a presence all over the country in the military, within the government, but they control certain regions because that's where they're the majority, basically similar to Pashtun Shia. And so there is an ongoing, if you looked at the map of how the country fell since last November, it was clear to observers that this is what was happening. So it didn't just happen in the last week like we're sort of seeing. It's been unfolding. And then finally, last point, the U.S. spent $2 trillion, nearly $2 trillion over the last 2 decades to bribe the government, the military, and the police. But they did not engage in nation building with that money. So not only did the Afghani government not gain the support of the people, the United States did not really truly gain the support of a broad enough coalition of people. So that's the context of why it fell the way it fell, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think that basically as an algebra equation, there has to be some popular support for the Taliban. You cannot survive against a major power like the United States unless you've got some support from which you can get supplies, move around without being turned in. Mostly it's probably rural areas of the support. Urban areas probably much, much less so, if at all. But they could not have gotten that far and moved in that quickly, even with a hapless military. But you're right. We spent. I've heard estimates of 1 to 2 trillion, depending on how you define it. Including paying our own soldiers and for our own action. 88 billion specifically on the military. Where they weren't being paid. That's part of the problem. They were having a hard time getting paid. It's pretty hard to be all that enthusiastic about, when they're not treating you right. Also, potentially, were there Taliban supporters in the military? Again, they're mingling in the streets. Maybe not. I don't know. And again, what is the Taliban? In terms of what is their ideology? Is it going to be as bad as when Omar was in charge? We don't know. They're not talking that way. There were reports that the Taliban fighters were going around door to door in Kabul looking for people, but one of the Taliban spokespeople on NPR this morning said that is not authorized, and we have a phone number for you to call if you see Taliban soldiers, abusing, and we will take care of it. May or may not be lip service, but just the fact that they're even putting that out there is an indication of a consciousness that they want to be legitimized in the international. But again, how much is that faction? How big is that faction? We just don't know. As to whether or not that spokesperson speaks for the majority of the Taliban, which is basically, a group of a lot of different individuals. A lot of different groups. So
yeah, and it's another conversation for another day if we analyze their situation over there. But I do want to say that from our perspective as American citizens, I would say the audience here, our people that we're speaking with, hopefully, the Saigon comparison. People are looking at the images on TV, and it's like, is this Vietnam? Are we losing with honor or losing with dishonor? And one thing to remember about the Saigon evacuation, our allies there held out for over nearly 2 years. Mm-hmm. This wasn't even 2 weeks from the time that or 2 months. I apologize. 2 months ago, we sort of May. I think we. Maybe I'm exaggerating. 3 months, 4 months ago, time flies. But the bottom line is, it all unfolded very, very quickly. Yeah. And so then what you said is, basically like, what can we expect there? And I would say, if past is any guideline, these are the same people that blow up girls' schools to kill them all because they are Hazari women and
at least some of them. We don't know if that's what the leadership stands for. We will find out soon enough, or whether or not they have any control over those factions. Vietnam comparison is completely inappropriate. 2 million Vietnamese died in the Vietnam War just with us alone. Not to mention the French and the Japanese being in there the years before. before that, 50,000 American soldiers. There's just no comparison. That was, a completely different situation with a lot of grudges that were going to happen. A lot of people did go to the airport, but it wasn't like the whole population of Kabul. It's, mostly people who are translators and who have worked with the American government that we do owe it to them to get them out of there. Families of people, we should take anybody we can, in my view, not worry about the paperwork or their visas, just get them on the planes, anybody who wants to go. I hope that that's what's actually happening. But of course, the politics back home, everybody wants to blame Biden right now for it. He's been president for 7 months. This is obviously something that melted down, that for 20 years we've basically been propping up an illusion, and now the Republicans are freaking out that so many Afghans may be coming into the country. They don't like that, and so it's going to be interesting. And we'll talk a little bit more in the next segment as to how how the American people may react in the short run versus the long run. But the politics are being the partisan politics, and even the Democrats that are caught up in Cold War liberalism, as I would call it. We'll talk a little bit about whether or not that's going to have an impact with the rest of the United States. But definitely in Washington, everybody's got their knives out for Biden right now because of the chaos that happened, but it really wasn't all that chaotic. I mean, they're getting them out, and we saw a few horror stories, but real quickly, the Biden was in a jam because the Afghan government was asking him, saying, don't be sending people out. People will lose confidence in our government. So Biden had to kind of wait, but didn't realize how quickly that it would fall apart overnight, that the president would just leave in the middle of the night. But it was kind of difficult because the minute you start evacuating everybody, you're sending a signal that it's over. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're about wrapped up in this part of it, but I would say that just real briefly that it's there's going to be a lot unfolding. We'll see, and people don't like these images, and people don't know really how to process, and it's a really difficult and challenging time in our history right now.
All right, as a quick intro to this one, I woke up to NPR Sunday morning, and it was story after story after story of the same thing. Biden botched the withdrawal, didn't plan ahead of time, took the government at its word that it would continue to fight, didn't listen to its own intelligence reports about the weakness of the government, and so this chaos, as they're saying, is Biden's fault. And after Biden gave his speech on Monday, they're all upset. The media is uniformly upset that he went back to Camp David. I think that the Washington media is what I am going to call a disconnect. Has what I'm going to call a disconnect from the rest of the American public, the Beltway media, as we refer to them. Of course, media people know all of the reporters who are going to be in trouble in Afghanistan. They've got insights that maybe the rest of America doesn't have. But I really think that, there's going to be a dip in Biden's poll numbers for a little bit. But I really think that most of the American people are going to look at this and say, this was inevitable. The fact that the government fell so quickly means that this was just, what is it, the statue with clay feet or whatever, or, a paper tiger the whole time. It just, there was nothing there. It was us. And for 20 years, how much longer? If we can't quote unquote fix and nation build in 20 years and make any kind of progress, then how much longer should we have stayed? Real quickly, they are harping on, well, we had 2,500 soldiers that stayed in there, and that kept the Taliban at bay. It only that reduction only kept them at bay because the Taliban knew that we were going to leave. If we had broken our promise on that, they would have attacked the 2,500 soldiers. We would have had to go in and escalate it. Biden, I think, was right right, and the media is criticizing him for this. I mean, especially NPR, and this harkens back to NPR's coverage of the Gulf War. I think they are so isolated they don't get it. But Biden I think, was right. It was either leave or immediately or escalation. Those were the two options. It was not just leaving this 2,500 in there indefinitely. Anyway, I think that the media. Don't even want to call it bias. I just think that they exist in their own reality, and I think they're going to be shocked when the rest of the country is basically going to be saying it's really horrible what we're watching, but I'm glad we're out of there.
It was a hugely unpopular place to leave troops for 20 years. Almost the polar opposite of the post-September 11th justification for going in the first place, which was to attack, find and hunt down and kill the people that caused 9/11. And Afghanistan was considered basically a failed state under the Taliban rule at the time, and so we didn't want it to be a safe haven for Al Qaeda. And so with that in mind, the consent was manufactured and sustained and maintained over a 20-year period, and so that's big picture. But so I think the way I kind of want to frame this for now is you posed to me, is there a disconnect between the Beltway media and the rest of the country? The majority of both parties were against it. The writing was on the wall that people were sort of increasingly dissatisfied with the status quo. But the media is in a completely different universe. So I would argue that we need to keep in mind that Beltway media caters to its business model and by extension to its audience. And I watched the Sunday shows this week and primetime coverage since last week, and it does reveal a bias towards a certain constituency. They are seeking access to the leaders, ratings, and profits. And this means insider access, market-focused demographics, and advertising-based profits. So news can be objective, news, air quotes, but more often than not, it's reflective of corporate media's priorities. And so to put a finer point on it, very few people support a decades-long occupation, nearly $2 trillion in spending, 2,500 soldier deaths, hundreds of thousands of soldier injuries, and more importantly, virtually no one wants to see a barbaric cabal of violent extremists get the upper hand on the greatest military power in the history of mankind, and literally no one wants to see suffering, death, and disenfranchisement of an entire nation we call our allies. So it's in this context that I would say media is very skilled at framing news like a car accident that we just can't look away from.
And they bring in the experts, the people who have been involved in diplomacy, the reporters who, again, they're probably understandably freaking out about what's happening to their counterparts in Afghanistan or what may happen to them, or the fact that they may or probably will be shut down at minimum, and the rest. And they may even have access and insight that the rest of America doesn't have. But there's nobody being invited on NPR or liberal NPR or CNN or any of the shows who are saying, yes, it's horrible what's happening, but this shows that we had to pull out, that this was just, that we had to pull the plug. It was not going anywhere. It was not being productive. Those voices should be on there. I'm not even talking about Noam Chomsky. There are a lot of people more moderate than him that are saying this, but they don't tend to be in the Beltway. They don't tend to be involved in the policy making or the discussions of the policy making. And I think that the polls, I think, as I said, there'll be a dip. Because when you see images like that, it does affect how you respond in the polls. But I think a year from now, people are going to be relieved that we're out of there, no matter what happens in Afghanistan.
And just my sort of where we go from here kind of perspective is I've started to hear, the Secretary of State and some other, Pentagon spokespeople, State Department spokespeople, or unofficial channels like you alluded to, former heads of these agencies and whatnot. They say things like, well, there are many countries where we don't have large troop presence, but we maintain this over the horizon capacity. And so in that context, nobody wanted to be the ones to say, you know what, we anticipate that it's going to be chaos. None of the folks were thinking chaos, and therefore it wasn't really built into the equation that our withdrawal would need anti-chaos measures. And
Right.
the truth is that you ask anybody who lived there or lives there, and they are heartbroken at the way this went down. So there's some space for criticism, a critique of the technique,
Right.
the strategy, but
Yeah.
the overall
Although it's
policy is had to be.
it's not really all that chaotic. I mean, we saw the stories of the people grabbing onto the plane, the people crowding and coming there, but they're getting people out, hundreds every day. It is happening, and there haven't been many engagements between the soldiers, and people are actually even still getting to the airport. So it's not, again, all that chaotic. It probably could have been done better. I don't know how it could have been done better. I don't know how, if you started pulling people out, that would have been it. That would have been the story. Oh, they're pulling out, before you have a chance to do anything. So, it just, again, I really think that we need to look at this, and we really need to look at the story of, we are not this all-powerful nation that can remake every culture into its own image. We don't have that kind of power. We don't have the right to do that. If there's going to be change, it's got to come from within the culture. You can't impose it from out. If anything, you give more power to the reactionary elements of that culture. And, anytime you invade, it's been proven throughout history. We should not have been here for 20 years. We should not have tried to nation build. We had some success in Iraq, but Iraq is a much different country from Afghanistan, and we were out. We've pretty much, mostly been out, for quite a few years there, and they did establish, some democratic institutions there. But we cannot, do this from a country that, the Soviet Union learned the lesson, right? Why didn't we learn the lesson from the Soviet Union? They couldn't do it. They were brutal as anything, and they were overthrown. That needs to be the discussion, the policy discussion. Do we stop doing this? Do we stop going into other countries, figuring we're going to turn it into a democracy or modernize it, and the rest? I feel horrible for all the women who came out publicly, asserting their rights, who are now sitting ducks if it does get as bad as it was. And whether or not that's going to have an impact, that is the saddest part of this. But we just, again, how long, and that needs to be the focus of the discussion. Why over 20 years did we not even make any progress that can be guaranteed to be permanent?
So hugely complicated topic, and I look forward to talking with you in either this format or some other format about all these elements that are arising. But as a psychology matter, as a human behavior issue, I think coercion and consent are hugely different things. Right. And what we're observing now is fear and uncertainty, like a frozen moment in time, and there's contingent reality. We don't know what's going to be in the future. But again, my thinking is that if you look at the post-World War II UN Declaration of Human Rights, that's an international norm that we are willing to endorse, support, fight for, maybe not go to war for, right? That's a little different. Occupying a country may not be the way you convince someone to have a modern perspective of inclusion and equality and progress and growth. But then there's this continuum of time thing. 20 years. It took 100 years from our Civil War to when we actually fully actualized citizenship rights for Black Americans. So things take time here too. And so it's hugely complicated. But one last thing I would say on this is that our country, from our perspective, we can't let the military-industrial complex priorities and the corporate sort of corrupting of the oligarchs of Afghanistan, like choices and possibly potentially mistakes, tell us that we can't engage in an activity like trying to elevate to a higher moral international order.
Yeah, and I think the quote of the week comes from a Taliban quote from like 15 years ago. They have all the watches, but we have the time. That was they just had to wait. They're, a very patient movement that way. They had to wait for the right moment, and this moment was going to come sooner or later because we weren't making any institutional progress. But yeah, we need to have a discussion about this as to how you can encourage the difference. Anyways, yeah, much more to talk about. We'll be talking about this and its political impact over time. But in the meantime, we got to get to the next segment.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right. Coming back to domestic politics, we have the Delta variant, again, all of the political issues heating up. We've got a lot of local resistance to Republican governors who have basically killed by law mandates, local mandates for mask wearing. And there is resistance in particularly 3 states in particular, Florida, Texas, and Arizona, court cases going different directions. Of school districts defying those governors and saying, we got to focus on our kids. Our parents have a right to be able to send their kids to school and have it be as safe as possible. Whether they've got legal arguments or just moral arguments, there are districts that are resisting. The governors are threatening, and I believe they carried something out today in Florida, although I haven't caught up to know what it is, but they are sanctioning districts. They're threatening to withhold salaries of administrators, perhaps even teachers, and there have been lawsuits with mixed results in some states. It probably depends on the details of the laws in the state, but also the judges that are there. But my understanding is there have been some lawsuits that have actually upheld the local power to buck the governors in those particular situations. Others in Texas, there's mixed results too. But again, I don't know the details of each lawsuit to know exactly what was happening, to know if that's actually a contradiction. And I need to point out, that in the middle of all this, Governor Abbott tested positive. He's had 3 vaccination shots. He'll probably be fine. He qualifies as a immune deficient individual to have 3. As he's presiding over a constituency that doesn't believe in vaccines, many of them, and are just fighting mask mandates tooth and nail.
Yeah, so it's a crazy time. We've talked about this in past weeks when COVID was really the main news. So we are looking today at masks, mandates, and the political implications. But just for a little bit of context, just to remind folks that we are still seeing an increased caseload. This Delta variant is running wild. And we're talking, I think the rate of national increase has kind of slowed a little bit, but if you look at certain states, it's still pretty bad. There's places like South Dakota where it's up over 5-fold. Right. Maybe that's had to do with Sturgis. It's not impossible because that happened last time, the big bike rally. But if you look at the states where it's worse, the states we're talking about, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, those are places where 1 out of 1,000 people get COVID every day. So it's significantly impacting the population. So the question is, what do you do about it? You're supposed to follow public health guidelines. That's best practice. That's like what countries around the world are doing. That's what we've done here in California, which we're going to get to the recall, but that's in part one of the main dings against Governor Newsom is that he's following the same international public health best practice that everybody is, except for these, southeastern states in our country. Look at California. We have a third of that rate. So a third of that rate means that there is we talked about this like months ago, or certainly many weeks ago, that there will be an experiment. We'll see how it plays out, and we are seeing how it plays out. To talk specifically to what you said about I think Texas is a really good example. Governor Abbott got COVID, which is just an ironic side comment. But the Dallas Independent School District Superintendent, Dr. Michael Hinojosa, he said that even though the state has a mandate against a governor's order against mask mandates, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court of Texas, it was narrowly targeted to just governmental, basically what amounts to governmental jurisdictions. So he said, as far as he's concerned, he remains legally allowed to keep the public health as the guiding principle, and that because of that narrow focus, the Independent School District of Dallas is not named. But he did say that he believes in following the law, and if his school gets sued and a judge does order him to follow the governor's order, he would follow the governor's order. But he feels that, like, look, I think this is exact quote that I heard the other day. So we're going to have a mask mandate tomorrow. We're going to be benevolent. We're going to be nice, and we're going to be firm, and we're going to enforce it. So it's basically telling everybody, like, we are doing this because it's the right thing to do, and there's no wiggle room here. This is why we're doing it until the legal reality changes.
Yeah, I mean, and the politics just aren't easing up at all. There was a teacher in Amador County was attacked physically because after trying to get in between a female woman principal and a father who was outraged that his kid was walking out of the school with a mask. I don't know if charges are going to be filed, but the father is banned from the campus at any rate. But the teacher was actually physically injured. I mean, it's really bad, and just the emotion around it. It's caught up in identity. Locally, I know now 4 attorneys who have had COVID. Several of them have gotten real sick. One of them was anti-vax, really sick. I'm really curious to see if that'll change his mind about it. But but it was again political identity. He is a very conservative who fell into the MAGA movement, and that's governing his medicine. I have 2 clients that have been positive, one who's very sick. And it's just, so it is, you had that question 6 months ago, a year ago, do you know anybody who has COVID? Now I'm starting to get to know a lot of people who have COVID, and some of them very sick. Only one who died. Question as to whether or not he died of that or other causes. He had other issues, but it really is at that point. And as we'll talk about, it's the politics of it are affected here. But children, you would think, should be an exemption from that. That the governors should limit their pandering to say, you know what, we're going to let the schools dictate as to the local community values. If your school board is making the wrong decision, then they don't get elected. That's what most governors will do, if they have a choice. Unfortunately, in some states like Arkansas, it was passed by legislature, no mandate. So the governor is now having, wishing he hadn't signed that bill. Some people are coming to their senses, but it's amazing to me that these governors are so caught up in the power play that they know it. They send their own kids to mask mandates private schools, including Ted Cruz and Governor DeSantis. I will say DeSantis is taking a hit in the polls. We'll see if he continues with this stance. He probably is figuring he can't. If he reverses himself, he'll look weak and he'll lose that MAGA support, and he can't win without it. But he's in a little bit of jam. People, a few just weeks ago, people were talking about him as being the standard bearer to replace Trump as president. Might still happen, but the luster is gone right now. He's sagging in the polls.
Yeah, and you touched on many elements of that sort of thread that we've talked about over the previous weeks about how it's a part of the political identity, the cultural war, the liberty, the libertarian perspective of I just don't want to be told what to do. And when this first started and we knew a lot less about it, the strategy that I think made the most sense was, let's prevent the hospitals from being overwhelmed. We can't have a breakdown in the medical system of too many people occupying limited beds, limited ICUs, limited resources. And Delta has pushed that needle back up towards stressing the medical system. So it's
one woman couldn't get in to get her cancer treatment because the ICUs, the hospital's full. She couldn't do it. I mean, so it has impacts beyond just COVID patients.
There's a map of all of the counties that have, within 95% of ICU beds filled, and it's spreading. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of the southeast part of the United States, and in fact, it's impacting our own community here. Just last week we heard from our public health officer, Dr. Hoffman, and also from the CEO of St. Joe's that there's a stress in our system here. We don't have the staffing levels to accommodate much more increase in the rate of hospitalizations and ICU occupation here in our community. And so they've, I don't know if it's still in place, but as of last week, they were going to stop elective procedures here in our community. So it's not a hypothetical. As a practical matter, the stress that is the guiding principle of when you take additional steps. We've reached that stress point. And so the question is, will we lock down? And I think no. I think I don't want to call it revolutionary fervor, but like the amount of pushback that would happen would be a public health crisis in and of itself. You'd see people's mental health would snap. People are not going to lock down, and the impact to the economy, people won't let that happen. So masks are like a pretty good compromise here. Get vaccinated. Only half the people, less than 60% in our community are vaccinated. So there's still an ongoing conversation that needs to happen. Mandates are a blunt tool to where persuasion should prevail. So that leads me to persuasion. Like that should be the focus of people's energy and efforts is bringing people along towards a better understanding of how to manage this.
We're talking about schools, though, in these particular states. We mandate all kinds of stuff for schools. There's clothing that they can and can't wear. There's behavior that's a lot stricter than anywhere else. That you're limited in all kinds of things. You're not allowed to leave the school grounds, right? So we've got mandates in schools. It's different from mandating in the community, but you're right. It's the politics of it. We won't be able to do another lockdown, and maybe that was overkill anyway, but we'll talk about that in another show. Which takes us to our last topic. All right, coming back to California. By now, probably by the time people are watching this, most of you have probably received your ballot. The election is held for September 14th. It has two items on the ballot, at least locally. I don't know if there's other counties that might have more on their ballot, but it is one question: shall Governor Newsom remain governor or be removed? Yes or no? And then after that, you've got a slew of candidates you can choose from as to who would replace him. You can, even if you vote no, you can vote on the second question. That's a common question I'm getting. But know that even if Newsom gets a no vote of 49%, he loses. Pardon me, if he gets supported by 49%, he loses. If somebody can in theory win with 15-20%. Right now, Larry Elder is this right-wing rich blogger he's ahead in the polls, but it's hard to say. He's got about 20% of the vote. There's a slew of Republicans, some Democrats. Governor Newsom and the Democratic leadership are taking the position that they are discouraging people from even voting in the second half, to just vote straight no. This was a little bit of a debate way back with the Schwarzenegger and Gray Davis recall. Cruz Bustamante had run. He opposed the recall, but he'd run, got about 30% of the vote. But Dianne Feinstein and other people said, I'm not endorsing anybody. I'm not voting for anybody in the second half. And we've talked about this on another show as to whether or not that's good policy on their part. But they're basically just doubling down, saying you don't want Larry Elder to appoint Dianne Feinstein's replacement if she becomes senator. And he is attacking it as the Republican recall. But polls have been pretty scary for him lately. Only one poll had the yes vote ahead, and it was an outlier. It was Survey USA, and it had him 15 points ahead. I think that was not asked properly, but most of the polls have him within. I think the closest poll has him within 3 points. The biggest poll has it within 10 points. It should not be that close. A few months ago, it was like the yes vote was in the 35% range. The concern for the Democrats isn't so much that the majority of that a lot of Democrats are going to defect and vote yes. The concern is the enthusiasm gap. Republicans, 85% of them intend to turn out. They want to, they see this as an opportunity. A lot of Democrats are, well, I don't know, the usual kind of thing. I'm kind of busy. I'm not really a Newsom fan anyway, and that has Democrats worried. In their favor, it's a lot easier to vote now. You get it in the mail. You mark it up. You send it back. We've got drop boxes all over the county in Humboldt County. You can take it. You can look on a map on the website. It's very easy to vote now. You just have to put it in the mail or drive it to a drop box or to the voter help centers in the last 4 days of the campaign. That might save Newsom. I think the polls are closer than it is. I do think that sometimes people try to send messages in polls, even if they don't intend to vote that way. And I think there are a lot of people who want Newsom sweating. But you got this big fire, second biggest fire ever in the history of California, threatening Susanville right now, possibly Quincy if things get real bad, already taking out one major town. You've got other controversies, water shortages being blamed on Newsom. I don't know how you blame that on him, but anyways, and some of and possibly the rollout, his hypocrisy with regard to COVID when he showed up. That's being used against him. But will the majority of voters want to bring in one of the alternate candidates? It doesn't seem that way, but that's my opinion. But we'll see. But the polls are closer than they ought to be.
So before we went on air, I just looked at Real Clear Politics and 538, and where they do these aggregated weighted averages of all the most recent polls, and they've got their own methodologies. It's an imperfect science, but in effect, we're talking definitely within the margin of error, like less than 3%. So the 538 one in particular shows it within like 1%. So
right.
So it's really, give or take, it's narrowing. The issue, I think, the big issue, like, let's call it dead even because of, the fact that we just know that in the recent past, the polling has been off by a little bit, where I think more Republicans are less engaged with the polling. So that said, it's within the margin of error. And as we talked about, it's about either, mobilizing the base versus that's the Democratic strategy. And the Republican strategy is basically, the enthusiasm of that anti-COVID response, the counter-COVID response that Governor Newsom, when the economy took an impact, now folks who own businesses, run businesses, Chamber of Commerce, folks who are in the business community, in overly generalizing, of course, but conservatives, ranchers, farmers, people in like in-state rural areas, like those folks are, that are many of whom, I hate to generalize, it's not my style, but in general, there's a long list of grievances and perceived grievances that are being at least published and pronounced and promoted by the Republicans. And like you said, there's this general disinterest, a state of disinterest or distraction from most Democrats. And a lot of folks are just, it's the summer. You're not following this very closely. Recalls are kind of strange. You hear that they're spending almost $280 million on this. And it's like, well, why don't we just wait till the election? Like, why do we actually have to recall him? Well, that makes it a highly political event. And the Democrats, I don't see the solidarity, and I don't see the outreach, and I don't see the attempts to persuade people. That really is just a question of calling up your friends and saying, hey, you're on Team Blue, just make sure you vote. And that seems a little short-sighted to me as a general policy, but that's the one they've chosen. So the big picture, I would say, can he lose? He most certainly can lose. It's not inevitable here. But will he? I don't think he will.
Yeah, I'm going to have actually a prediction at the end about what I think the percentage is going to be. But and like I said, and I do think the polls are overestimating what it is here. But that enthusiasm gap is a big deal. That's how it'll happen if it happens. Is that Democrats just don't vote? But the Democrats do have a little less than a month to pull it together. It's going to be a story. People are going to learn more about Larry Elder and what can happen. As it gets close, the news is going to be covering it, and there probably will be some type of grassroots response. Get your vote out there, and the rest. I already know several people who've returned their ballots. I don't think I got mine yet, but it's like I said, I do think we also really need to take a look at our recall law. It's way too easy to get the stuff on the ballot. It's only the second time we've had it for a governor in recent history, but it's just it's too easy. It was made easier by a judge ruling during the pandemic too. They were given like months extra time to get their signatures, and I don't think the pandemic really slowed them down all that much, especially in their areas, right, where they are doing their thing. But we need to take a look at this. I think it's in California. It's too easy to get a recall measure on the ballot. It wastes money and everybody's time. There's all kinds of really bad ones locally. We experienced one here with our district attorney about 20 years ago. Went down in flames because a lot of people just vote against recall as a matter of principle. But we need to look at that just like we need to look at that it's too easy to make a constitutional amendment. We need to look at supermajorities for these things, or at least, like solid majorities, like 55% or something like that. But it's too easy to get it on the ballot. 50% is, to actually pull somebody out who's been duly elected, and not for any reason. It could be for any reason. We need to look at that. But we'll see what happens in a few weeks.
Yeah, so a couple last things. I know we have a limited amount of time left here, but one thing that I recall hearing you say is that it might make sense. Our recall system is sort of ridiculous, and it might make sense that if we really want to maintain as citizens the right to recall the governor, that ought to just mean you replace the governor with the lieutenant governor. Right. That would be a very reasonable thing to do. And with that in mind, I'm going to just mention that I have heard the case made. I heard it on a radio show, a podcast, and I think I saw it in the New York Times where they're basically saying that it's probably a federal equal protection clause violation to have Larry Elder become the governor with a 19% vote. That disenfranchises, and that's 19% of the participants in the recall. So it's really it's a flawed system that we have, and I think people, the reality of it is starting to sink in, and maybe we'll learn a little bit more about it over the next coming 4 weeks, and we'll decide if the federal judge does step in by the recall will have already happened, so it won't affect this. It won't affect this one, but there's a chance to improve it. And then there's another element of this too. Finally, that I would say is just more broadly, if it's the case that we are being told, don't worry, like if you're a Democratic strategist and you're telling people don't look at the second question, only the first. It just, and there's 40 candidates. You've got 2/3 of the state are registered Democrats, or so 2/3 of the voters. If they're being told by their leaders and they're being guided by opinion makers that don't even look at the second part of it because it doesn't matter, because none of those people are good or viable, none of those people are authentically equipped to be governor, that's an indicator that there's a problem here.
Yeah, I'm curious about the lawsuit, because obviously it wasn't filed back in the day, but then again, Schwarzenegger got like 48% of the vote, so he may have outperformed Davis on that. So maybe it was a moot issue, but people should, if you're a Democrat who wants to support and oppose the recall, you should vote for somebody in the second one, because it keeps the percentages down. And if those lawsuits are successful, it's only going to be successful with the lower percentages of the replacement candidates. But we'll see. That'll be interesting to see if it passes. All right, we are at the point of the show where we make predictions. Dave, what do you got?
I wish this wasn't the case, but I'm going to talk about Afghanistan, and I'm going to talk about everybody, friends, colleagues, family members are saying, what was Biden thinking? What was this administration thinking? Why would they do it this way? And so I'll just say that, this is a little bit of revelation of kind of the way I think is, I told a few people I thought the country would fall very quickly, the way things were going since last November. And that means that tragedy was necessary. And my thinking was that I'm not the only person who thought this way. So there must have been a plan to renew public support for us to do something once the atrocities start to back up, which of course is totally messed up. So there's talk that there's, maybe possibly let's let Iran back a civil war and get them engaged in Afghanistan politics. But I think it's something I think that's a little too mischievous or nefarious. Military spending on over-the-horizon technology, AI, drones, persistent drones, drone swarms, something akin to the fictional Skynet. There have been war games out there, for context, that have been called like the inevitable drone war with China. So this is a proxy war that where the United States, I think, is planning on developing the capacity for artificial intelligence, electronic warfare, drones, etc. And the target will be the evil Taliban. And so that's really sad, but that was my first thought. And so the impact is, I'm going to think that our colleague Aaron, who said he thought President Cheney might actually happen, or Liz Cheney might sort of rise to the top of the Republican perspective. So those are neoconservatives, that there's going to be like neoconservatives. I think that there's going to be a rise there.
Well, my long-term prediction is that a year from now, it's not even going to be a factor in Biden's ratings, but the one way or another. But my prediction is, I'm going to go and make a prediction that the recall will be defeated. Yes vote will be 44%. No vote will be 56%. I think the polls are off. I'll go into more detail about why in a future show, but that's my prediction. Okay, well, that takes us to the end of this show. We will be back next week. I'm sure we'll be talking about at least 3 of these issues. Unless something else breaks that is immense, but we will be back. And until next time, keep on thinking.